The sun beat down on the town's main street, turning the dust into a pale haze that clung to boots and coats. Shops stood crooked on either side, their porches crowded with townsfolk who had nothing better to do than feed on gossip. Laughter rang out, not the kind born of joy, but the cruel sort that thrived on someone else's suffering. At the center of the street, tied to a rough post, stood a woman. Her dress was torn, caked with dirt, and the once bright fabric hung in tatters against her thin frame. Bruises marked her face, her arms and her back bore fresh stripes where the whip had landed. She did not cry out. She only bit her lip until blood showed, her silence an act of defiance that enraged her tormentors further. The men circling her spat accusations like venom. "Caught stealing bread again," one shouted. "Should have left town when her husband died," another sneered. "She's nothing but a curse worth less than the dirt on our boots." Each jeer brought more laughter, more stones of humiliation thrown with words sharper than steel. Children clung to their mothers' skirts, watching wide-eyed, as though cruelty were nothing more than entertainment to pass the heat of the day. No hand reached forward to help her. No voice rose to defend her. The whip cracked again, and though her body jolted, she refused to scream. Dust swirled around her bare feet, clinging to the blood at her heels. For a moment, even the jeering quieted as she lifted her eyes, not in plea, but in a silent, hollow defiance that unsettled some and amused others. Hopelessness weighed heavy on the street. To the crowd, she was already broken, a ghost of a woman not worth saving. And yet, in that silence, something shifted. From the far end of the street came the steady echo of boots against the boards, each step heavy, deliberate, cutting through the laughter. Conversations faltered. Heads turned. The men with the whip stilled their hands, uneasy though they would never admit it. The woman, her breath ragged, did not look up, but the crowd did, and for the first time that day, fear sharp and sudden began to spread among them. He came into view slowly, as if the earth itself had decided to rise up against the cruelty of men. Broad-shouldered, his hat casting a long shadow across a weathered face, the rancher walked with the steady gait of someone who had long ago stopped fearing anyone. His coat bore the dust of the trail, his boots the weight of countless miles, yet nothing about him seemed weary. He carried himself with the silent authority of a man who owned not only land, but also the respect or the caution of everyone who lived within miles. Whispers darted through the crowd. "That's him, the wealthy rancher. He don't meddle in town affairs. What's he doing here?" He stopped only a few feet from the woman tied to the post. For a moment he said nothing, his eyes fixed on the raw marks striping her back. The whip still dangled from one man's hand, and its leather edge glistened with her blood. The rancher's jaw tightened, a muscle ticking at the edge of his cheek. "Untie her," he said at last, his voice low, carrying more weight than a shout ever could. The crowd stiffened. A few of the men barked nervous laughs. "She's a thief," one sneered. "She's worthless," another spat. "Not worth the rope that holds her." The rancher's eyes lifted, cold and unflinching. "I said untie her." Silence pressed heavy. The men shifted, uncomfortable under his stare, but pride bristled. "This ain't your business," the one with the whip growled. "She's trash. Let her rot." The rancher stepped forward, boots sinking in the dust, and with a single motion, his hand gripped the whip's handle. He tore it from the man's grasp as though from a child. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. He turned then, not to the men, but to the woman. Her body sagged against the ropes, strength nearly gone, her face hidden by strands of dirt-matted hair. For the first time that day, her lips parted in a shaky breath. Was it fear, or the faintest hope? With deliberate calm, he cut through the bindings. The ropes fell, and she crumpled forward, until his arms caught her. The crowd murmured, stunned into silence. No one moved, no one dared, for in that moment, with the broken woman cradled against him, the rancher had done more than stop a beating. He had challenged the judgment of an entire town, and the town would not forgive him for it. The rancher's house stood at the edge of his wide lands, a sturdy structure of timber and stone, built not for show but for endurance. By the time they reached it, the sun had slipped low, painting the sky in streaks of crimson. The town's laughter and cruelty seemed a world away, though its echoes still clung to the woman's bruised skin and trembling hands. Inside, the silence was heavy but safe. No jeers, no whips, only the low crackle of fire in the hearth, and the scent of wood smoke. She sat stiffly on a chair, while he fetched a basin of water and a clean cloth. His movements were rough, not from carelessness, but from unfamiliarity. Tending wounds was not the work of a man who usually faced cattle and storms. When he knelt beside her, she flinched. His hand paused mid-air. For a moment, their eyes met, hers wide with distrust, his steady but uncertain. Then slowly, he touched the cloth to her skin. She hissed as the sting of water met the raw lashes on her back, but she did not pull away. He worked in silence, the only sound her shallow breaths and the rhythmic ring of the cloth. His touch, though awkward, carried no cruelty. It was the first kindness she had felt in longer than she could remember. Later, at the table, he set a plate of food before her. She hesitated, fingers hovering, as though expecting it to be snatched away. He said nothing, only sat across from her, eating his share with quiet patience. When she finally took a bite, a flicker of life stirred in her hollow eyes. As night deepened, she sat by the fire, the glow softening her gaunt features. He busied himself with small tasks, pretending not to watch her, though his gaze often lingered. There was something in her silence, a strength hidden beneath the bruises, that unsettled him. For years, he had lived alone, hardened by land and loss. His heart had been buried under the weight of wealth and solitude. But as he watched her hands curl around the tin cup of warm broth, as he heard the faint sigh of relief escape her lips, something long forgotten shifted inside him. It was not yet love, nor even trust, but it was the beginning of both, the first spark breaking through the ashes of a man who thought he had nothing left to give. The town did not forget. By dawn the next morning, whispers had already become wildfire. In saloons and storefronts, men muttered over whiskey glasses, women gossiped on porches, and children repeated what they overheard. The rancher carried her off. He's lost his wits. Why would a man of his standing protect a woman like that? Respect for him had always walked hand in hand with envy. He had more land, more cattle, more wealth than any man around. And now, with a single act of defiance, the town had found its weapon, scandal. By the third day, the confrontation came. A group of men rode out to his ranch, dust billowing behind them like storm clouds. Among them were creditors who had long resented his independence, town leaders hungry for control, and enemies who had waited years for a crack in his armor. They dismounted at his gate, boots heavy on his land. He met them on the porch, arms crossed, his face carved from stone. Inside, the woman watched from behind the curtain, her breath shallow, fear tightening her chest. One of the men, red-faced and puffed with self-importance, stepped forward. "You've brought shame to this town," he spat. "Sheltering her after what she's done, stealing, lying, bringing ruin to every man she touches." Others chimed in, their voices sharp. "She's worthless, she's ruined. Send her away before her curse falls on you." The rancher said nothing at first. His silence unnerved them more than words. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and steady. "She stays." The air seemed to tighten, the heat of the day pressing harder. The men shifted uneasily, then grew bolder in their numbers. "You stand against us for her," one sneered. "You'd throw away your standing for a broken woman." He took a single step forward, and though his hands were empty, the movement carried the weight of a drawn gun. "Her life is worth more than all your jeers," he said. "You've had your fun beating a woman in the street. Not here. Not again." The tension thickened, brittle as dry timber. Fingers hovered near holsters, eyes narrowed, breaths caught between words and violence. For one heartbeat, it seemed the porch would erupt in gunfire, blood staining the dust. Then, as if some invisible line had been drawn, the men faltered. They muttered curses, spit into the dirt, and one by one, turned back toward their horses. But the look in their eyes carried a promise. This fight was not over. Inside, the woman pressed a trembling hand against the window frame. For the first time, she saw him not just as a rescuer, but as a man willing to stand alone against the world for her. And it terrified her almost as much as it moved her. The town gathered in the square, on a blistering afternoon, drawn by whispers of confrontation. Merchants closed their shutters halfway, eager to watch without being seen, while children darted through the crowd, sensing drama in the air. At the center stood the rancher, tall and unyielding, with the woman at his side. Her face remained hidden beneath a worn shawl, but the tremor in her shoulders betrayed her unease. Across from them, town leaders and loud-mouthed detractors fanned the fire of resentment. "She don't belong here," one cried. "She's cursed, ruined, worth nothing." Another spat. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd, swelling like a tide. The rancher raised his hand, and the noise faltered. His voice carried, steady as a church bell. "You measure a person's worth in coins, gossip and cruelty," he said, sweeping his gaze across them. "But her life isn't measured by your standards, not by your lies, not by your stones, and not by the lash of a whip." The crowd shifted, unease cutting through their bravado. Yet a handful of men stepped forward, puffed with anger. "You'll stand against all of us for her," one demanded. "You'll throw away your good name, your wealth for a woman who has nothing." The rancher's jaw tightened, his hand hovering near the revolver at his side. "She has something you've never had," he said, his tone sharp as steel. "Dignity, strength, the courage to endure what would have broken any of you." Tension snapped like a bowstring. A hot-headed young man lunged, hand on his gun. In a flash the rancher's weapon was drawn, not fired, but held steady, unwavering. His calm was more dangerous than violence itself. The aggressor froze, swallowed hard, and stepped back. The crowd's bluster withered. No one else dared challenge him. Murmurs turned to silence, silence to reluctant retreat. One by one they backed away, unwilling to test the will of a man who feared nothing, not even their scorn. For a long moment, dust and quiet hung heavy. Then slowly, the woman lifted her gaze to him. Her eyes brimmed with tears she had fought for weeks to suppress. Seeing him risk everything, not for gain, but for her, cracked something deep within her walls. Her fear began to melt, replaced by something fierce and unfamiliar, the knowledge that she was worth fighting for. And in that knowledge she wept, not in despair, but in the dawning light of redemption. The ranch lay quiet under the hush of twilight. The air smelled of cut hay and pine smoke, a gentleness that stood in sharp contrast to the harsh voices of the town. Inside, the fire burned low, its glow spilling warmth across the wooden floor. She sat near the hearth, her hands folded in her lap, still uncertain whether she truly belonged in a place so still, so safe. The rancher entered quietly, setting aside his hat and gloves. For a moment, he only looked at her, at the woman who had once been bound and broken in the street, now sitting with a quiet strength that had survived far more than most men ever could. He stepped closer, his voice calm, but resolute. "You don't owe me thanks," he said, "but you should know. You're not a burden here. This home isn't charity, it's yours if you'll have it." Her eyes flickered, doubt and longing warring within them. "You don't know what you're asking," she whispered. "The town will never forgive me, or you." A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I've never asked the town's permission for anything, and I won't start now." He lowered himself to one knee, not with flourish, but with the steady conviction of a man who had made up his mind. From his pocket he produced a small simple band of gold, plain but gleaming in the firelight. "I can't change what they've done to you," he said, "but I can give you what they tried to take, your dignity, your place, your name, my name." Her breath caught, tears filling her eyes faster than she could blink them away. For a long heartbeat, the weight of years of scorn, loss and loneliness pressed down on her. And then as she placed her trembling hand into his, the weight lifted. In that quiet room, surrounded by nothing but firelight and silence, she was no longer the woman whipped in the street. She was his bride, honored and cherished, her future bound not by cruelty, but by choice. What the town had tried to break, the rancher chose to heal, by giving her not pity but his name.